Do you like books or movies or TV shows or songs with lyrics? You know, things that were created by writers? Of course you do. Do you like watching people type? I doubt it. Do you like hearing people tell you about how they came up with the things they type? Maybe. And there are lots of shows like that. But this isn't one of them. Do you ever procrastinate? Writers do too. So, if you've ever enjoyed a great book or film or TV show or song or poem, and you thought, I'll bet the woman who wrote this epic high fantasy TV series, or the guy who wrote this funny queer sci fi novel, or the person who writes this punch you in the gut poetry would be really fun to hang out with. And I'd like to hear them confess their bad not writing habits. You're in the right, not writing place. I'm Benjamin Gorman, and the quiet guy behind the glass over there is Doug, the producer. I write novels and collections of poetry and stuff, and Doug does his best to try to make me sound better. From Not a Pike Publishing, welcome to Writers Not Writing.
Today's secret word is mixed bag.
Perfect. Oh, that's great. Today's guest is Scott Boss. He's an author, a podcaster, a musician, healthcare worker. His sci-fi trilogy, Cosmic Arc, starts with Interstellar Islands, continues with The Night Chasers, and concludes in Return to the Belt. And I want to promise all of the viewers and listeners, neither Scott nor I will be in the least bit offended if, while you are listening to this, you hop over and order your copies during the show. That will not bother us, so feel free. So thanks for being on the show today, Scott.
Thank you for having me. It's exciting to be here.
Yeah. So one of the things we have to do is explain to our listeners what it is we are wearing. Of course, our YouTube viewers can see that we're in these costumes, but we always go all out for this show. So tell everybody what you chose to dress up as today.
Yeah, well, I was surprised when I got the request since it's a podcast, and I was like, is anybody even going to see it? And you're like, well, don't worry, we'll explain. And I was like, well, what I feel most comfortable in at this point in life is my three-piece suit. You know, you want to look professional, but then since I started balding in my mid-20s, I got a Miley Cyrus wig, which are real good after Halloween. You can really load up on wigs, which it looks like you wouldn't hurt from one either. And so we loaded up on those. And so I've got my three-piece suit, my Miley Cyrus wig. Just gives me my confidence. And you know, you feel like you're going to a really important black tie affair, but also that we're having a party in the USA at the same time.
Yes.
So I'm glad the viewers get to see it. I'm sorry if you're not seeing this on YouTube. You should probably go back and watch that one too, just to get the
Yeah,
full effect.
it is a good look. I mean, very, very formal, and also, you know, it's not party in the front, party in the back, formal in the front. It's like party on the top, formal everywhere.
Yes.
Like it's a good. And so I thought I would copy that, and so I went with this. I got one of these Mr. Pumpkins suits on Amazon because I wanted to be formal as well. So, and I'd seen that sketch on SNL, and I thought he looks classy. So I made sure to get my Mr. Pumpkins suit here, and then I went with that same wig that Tom Hanks wore. So it's got the white bit here that folks can see. But it's nice for bald guys like us. Now I've got this full head of curly black hair and this white bit in the front, and you're right, I do feel more confident. So maybe wigs are the way to go.
I feel like we can go to a party together like this if only we weren't on opposite coasts here.
Oh yeah, the way this is the party. Like we have now, we've got the coast covered. The party is here. Yes, we're doing it right. So this is a show about procrastination, what we do when we're not writing. And, I've done so many shows where it's about what's your process? How do you write what you write? We get those questions over and over. And I thought, well, yeah, but it's more interesting to hear about what we do when we're not writing. So this week, what in the way of like pop culture, movies, that kind of thing, what's been keeping you from your writing?
So a couple things. So there's always shows, and right now there's the NFL playoffs. I'm kind of oddly a guy who's into sports that also is very much into the arts, so I kind of land somewhere in between. But out here in Western North Carolina, we have what's called the Brevard white squirrels, and they're not albino. They're truly just white squirrels. They have a little brown streak on their back. Everybody can go out there and look it up. I'm not making this up, but that's the kind of squirrels we have in our backyard. And so we made a project with my kids, and we made some of those bird feeders out of pine cones that you find in the backyard, and you load them up with peanut butter and stick a bunch of bird seed to them. Well, guess who got to those first was the white squirrels. And so I was like, well, I like the white squirrels, but like I got to make this harder on them because they're not just, birds trying to store up for the winter. These squirrels are very healthy. So I was like, let's make this a little harder. So I created, those dog leash lines that you have
Yeah.
like to lead your dog far out into the yard if you don't have a fence. Well, we had one, but we have a fence, so I'm not using it. So I tied it from the kids' play place to our porch and put the feeder or the pine cone all wrapped up in the middle, so they would have to, like, I don't know, Mission Impossible all the way over there to get to it. And then another one from like a hanging string. So they would climb up the tree and they would grab this yarn and reel it in, and then they would grab onto it and just swing from it. And so this was a continual theme at our house for entertainment because I like them. I don't want to injure them, but I love watching how acrobatic they are when they get out there. And yeah, talk about procrastination. You could spend
Yes.
hours doing that and then trying to catch them on film while they do it. So
That is brilliant. I'm glad you're catching it on film. So you have, yeah, American Ninja Warrior for squirrels in your backyard,
yes,
essentially.
yeah, we call it the White Squirrel Chronicles, but
Yes. So
it's
was
not.
this a thing that you came up with during like the COVID lockdowns, or
Oh
did?
yeah,
Yeah.
that's where it started. That was
Yep.
we're home all the time. What do we do now? Let's stand at the backyard and stare outside and wonder what the outside world is like. And then
Yeah,
you're
that's
like,
right.
well, there's a lot of white squirrels out there because we with kids especially, we're like we raised butterflies from cocoon the full phase. We raised tadpoles until they turned into frogs, and we got to release them and all that. So we did all the little outdoorsy things to kind of keep active and keep your brain going instead of just binge watching everything you could find. So we did it all, and definitely been binge watched as well. So
Oh, that's so much healthier than my slip into a depressive phase and take 3 naps a day. Like at least you did something cool with your kids to
yeah, yeah,
do.
we
Um,
tried around the naps and all that. You
yeah,
gotta do
my
what you gotta
son's
do.
older, and so his COVID kind of experience was he was like, oh wait, before I was required to go to all these events and do all these things, and now I get to play video games with my friends on the headphones. This is kind of great. And so he was
Right.
fine, and I'm the extrovert, and I was like, I'm in hell. This is the
Yeah.
worst. I'm so trapped. And he was like,
Well,
nope, I'm hanging with my friends every day. This is great. So
yeah, that was kind of the good thing for me because I've always been an introvert, and at the same point needed the activities to force me to go see people because I do need that. But then it was like, oh, now you've got none. So thankfully I had my family, but it was like I just started. I did not procrastinate. I wrote like 5 novels over
oh,
those 2 years because it was just like every night you're like, well, we don't have soccer practice. I guess I'll get to writing again,
oh,
and before I knew it, I'm like, all those ideas that had been stored up that I was like, one day I'm going to write that. It was like, this is that one day, buddy. If you're not going to write it now, you're going to,
I am
so
so jealous. I had these big ambitions that I was going to write 3 novels over the course of I started them all. And
right.
I made good progress on one and wrote
Yeah.
2 books of poetry during the time. It was just, I was in a totally different headspace and
Well,
did
that's
not
the
get
thing.
nearly as much. And I've talked to a lot of writers who are like, I just can't, like, it was so hard. So
I've,
good for
I've
you
heard
for
that
getting
too.
that done.
I definitely got stuck in one of them where I was just like, I don't know what it's like when people converse anymore. Where
Yes, yes.
you're like you're trying to write character dialogue and you're like, God, I don't remember how would this person reply. I don't know. Nobody talks to me anymore.
There haven't been conversations in months. Yeah.
No, and I don't know what a normal response would be. Then I'm like, oh no, I should probably get out there a little more.
Well, one of my projects was a sci-fi where there was a plague on a colony ship, and so the people were trapped in their cabins. And I was like, "This is too close to home.
Right.
Like, I can't. Nobody will want to read this because this is
No.
exactly what we're experiencing." I was like, "Nope,
That's
it's not going to
that's
fly."
what everybody said too, is like, oh, you should write a novel about it. And I was like, no, no,
No,
this is the
no one
last thing I
wants
want
to
to
read
write
about
about
this
right
thing.
now.
I
I'm
was like,
sorry.
oh yeah, I'm getting people away and on this colony ship and this adventure that takes place. And I was like, no, I've recreated the pandemic. Nobody wants to
Yeah,
read this book.
no,
So
we don't want to
that
hear
one will
about it,
never see
man.
the light of day.
Probably not for 10, 15, 20 years until
Yeah,
people are like the what? And you're like, no, no, the pandemic.
exactly. Yeah, informing the last generation, the next generation. There was this thing.
Yeah,
It was a pandemic. Here's a
yeah,
metaphor for it in space.
yeah.
So, in addition to the squirrels, what else have you been paying attention to in the news?
In the news, so there was, like I said, I'm a little bit of a sports fan, and so there was the Damar Hamlin story, the
Yes.
Buffalo Bills player, and that one, it hit me. If you hadn't heard the story, it was a guy that got hit on the field, nothing even major, and he just went down, and we're all sitting there watching, and we're like, okay, any minute now he's going to get up, and then they kept coming back and going, we're not up yet. His heart stopped, and all this stuff, and I was like, man, did I just watch somebody die on the field? Like that's crazy. I've never seen that, and I've watched sports all my life. And so, long story short, he's okay now. I'm not going to say he's perfect, but he's okay. He's alive and all that. And one of the cool things you saw out of it was the social media and the internet generation, where you're like, wow, like the outpouring of love and support he got from people was just instant and enormous. And
Including
then
Bengals
his
fans in Cincinnati. That was cool to
yeah,
see.
yeah, including the people that cared for him from the other team, and all that. And all these donations went up to one of his charities, and just all these millions of dollars going to his charity. And you're like, man, that is the future. That's what we've been talking about. That's what you and I've probably been writing about at
Yeah.
some point about if we all banded together, this is what the future would look like. And then as soon as those stories ended, you hear about the one that the player involved from the other team in the hit was T. Higgins from Cincinnati, who did absolutely nothing wrong. Again, I've watched sports my whole life. He did nothing wrong. He
No.
wasn't even the one hitting him. And somebody called him out, a former player, and of course some other people on Twitter and whatever, and said if he wouldn't have done this, then Damar would be fine, which was totally not true. But it doesn't
Absolutely.
matter because the internet is the internet.
Right.
As much as it ran away with the charity donations and everything else, it also ran away with the hate and the hate speech towards him and whatever you want to call it, and the threats that he received. And you got to imagine how bad T. Higgins already felt.
Right.
And then you're like, great. And now these people are piling on him to the point that Damar's family, the guy that was injured, they've reached out to T and told him, hey, you're not at fault. We don't hold anything against you. So awesome for them, but also awful for them that they even had to step away from their potentially dying family member to be like, hey, wait, no, it wasn't his fault.
Right.
Wasn't this guy's fault, and you're like, we really want to get into this right now. And I'm like, it just showed the absolutely polarizing story of the world as we live in, that you're just like, oh God, the internet is so awesome. And oh, the internet is so awful.
Yes.
And
Yeah,
more of the
it
people
really is a
behind it.
great illustration of that. I watched that hit. It was a very
Nothing.
normal football play. He got
Yeah.
up afterwards, like, I'm gonna celebrate. I
Yeah.
have, successfully tackled this guy. Everything looks fine. And then just went back. And
Yep.
I was totally with you. I was like, and people have been talking for years about we're eventually gonna see a death on the field. Like,
Right.
on national television, because this happens even more. Apparently, I didn't know this beforehand. This happens in middle school and like Pop Warner. This happens in high school, and then kids' bodies are just more fragile, and so it happens more
Right.
often. And so I'll be interested to see if years down the road we're seeing even more parents saying, "I don't want my kid playing Pop Warner football. I
Yeah.
watched that game. That's terrifying."
Yeah. Well,
Because
I'm already there, and I've played football and basketball growing up, not major, but I played them both, and I just always gravitated a little more towards basketball. And then, like watching my kids now, I'm just like, go to basketball, go to soccer, go to
yep,
something else, because there's just nothing in here to get hit in the head frequently that seems like a good idea.
yeah,
Like it just doesn't. Don't get me wrong, I still love watching it. That's probably the hypocritical part, that I'm like, yep, I'm tuning in. The playoffs are this weekend. I'm gonna be the watching, but it's like, yeah, please protect them more. Helmet
please,
technology,
yeah.
whatever you got to do. But and they have a little bit, because of course, you get enough you know fighting back about some of the injuries we've seen. But it's also just like, man, I don't think I would want my kids playing at this point. It just
Well, and
seems
it's tricky as a
scary.
parent. Like if you have a kid who's going, I really want to play this, that would have been
Yeah.
really hard. Luckily, my son was like, I want to do swimming and I want to do track. And I was like, awesome.
Yeah, yeah, you're not going to hit anybody there.
Not
Yeah.
a lot of hits, not high impact. So, oh, good. I'm so relieved, but I feel for parents where they're saying, I love football. My kid wants to play football. Let them play football. And I'm going, yeah, but also their brain is really valuable.
Yeah.
I don't want,
Yeah. Yeah.
as a teacher, I'm watching these kids and I'm going, oh, this kid's got his third concussion this season.
No, that's
He's in
scary.
my class and he's zoning out, and it's scary. So yeah, that was a wild story. I hadn't thought about the social media angle, but you're right. It's a really good illustration of just how polarized our. I think that, that amplification effect. Now we can see the wonderful things people are doing and how horrible people can be to one another.
Yeah, all at the same time. Yeah.
It's so fast. So what about outside of, well, related to sports, that kind of thing, but what about other hobbies when you aren't writing?
Yeah, well, I have a bunch. They all end up, like I said, mostly are creative. I did say played. I still try to play basketball here and there, but nothing major. But I make music. I have a recording studio, so like you said at the intro, I do some podcasting and stuff. My podcast is straight up like, here's things that I've written that I just want to get out there, and I'll read them in pieces and things like that, just to because it takes so long between books. So I'm like, all right, podcast and work on music in between, because it's just a different side of the creative brain, which is odd, but like as you know, you write, and then you're like, all right, that creativity is spent. I need to take a month or whatever. I've heard people say write every day. I disagree. I think I need a break mentally to just let my creative bank refill, but it's a different creative bank. It's like having a dessert stomach at Thanksgiving. You stuff yourself, and then the pie comes out and you're like, man, I could not eat another bite of turkey, but I could eat 3 slices of pie. It is just like that, where it's that creative bank. And so again, for the YouTubers, there's guitars and basses and things hanging on the wall back here. And so I write this pop funk band that I've been in for years. We used to tour a little bit, and we're on a couple little labels called Groove Carnival. And then all my stuff is studio projects now. I have kids and a career and things that I'm just like, I can't do all of it, and I can't tour still. So I'm like, I much prefer the studio side of it anyway. So it's like I do that. I write heavy metal too for the metalheads out there. That goes under the name El Caro. And then I do everything in between, like kind of pop rock stuff just on my own, just because it's fun and I can play the instruments and I can record it all in my little studio here. And so it's just nice to start a day where the song did not exist
Yeah.
and finish the day with a new song in the world, and then wake up the next day and determine if that song sucks or if it's still really good. And you just
Oh,
never know
I
until
feel
you
that
do
so
it.
strongly as a poet. Like,
Yeah, it's the same
as
as yeah, it's
novelists,
the same.
our novels, my novels, I don't know about how fast you are. Mine take like 2 years. And so
Yeah,
it is hard to have that feeling of, oh, I'm done. And it's
yeah,
rewarding to go, I wrote a poem today and maybe I'll edit it tomorrow and it's good, but it's finished, And so I
yeah. And
totally
you
agree
just
with you
you
being able
wake
to
up.
change up. Then I can go back to the book, but I got this one thing accomplished and it's out there in the world.
Yeah, and like I said, you wake up and it didn't exist today, and now it does. And if tomorrow it ends up being good, then you're like, man, I just added something good to the world,
Yeah.
and I can share this. And if one person reads this poem and has a good feeling from it, or listens to this song and enjoys it, then it's like, well, that was worth doing, rather than just binging another thing,
And
which I enjoy doing too.
the pop funk hip hop band, the metal band, and your own solo project stuff, is that all available on, can people find
Yes,
all that online?
they
Okay.
can.
We'll make sure to
So
post
I have it
links to
generally
that.
linked through my websites and things, which I think
Okay.
we'll put in the show notes. But
Yes.
I do most of them on Bandcamp, because Bandcamp pays the artist the most. If you haven't heard of them or used them, definitely worth using. I know people love to stream. I'm starting to get there. Like most the pop funk band Groove Carnival, you can find on streaming. One of my heavy metal releases is on there. I'm getting more, but it costs more to get that
Yes.
out there. And then if you've ever looked it up, Spotify and all the streaming services pay you less than a penny per song stream.
It's
So if you
brilliant.
add up, like, I'm going to pay $8 or $10 for this album because I like it and I want to support the artist, do that on Bandcamp and you're going to support the artist. Streaming them, totally fine too, but I can guarantee you I get a royalty check every year from them, all the streamers combined, and it'll be like $10,
Yep.
and you're just like, hey, I could have sold one album and made that much,
Yep.
So it's, of course, if you stream a billion streams, which I don't, you would make more, but it's still like less than a fraction of a cent per stream for
Yep.
most services. So that's why I gravitate towards Bandcamp, because they actually support the artist the most.
And
So
when you get it on Bandcamp, you download it, you own the MP3, right? It's not
yeah, you own
that's
the whole
I'm
thing.
old school. I like to own my stuff
Me
because
too.
when I have purchased a song, I've heard stories of, some of these big services go in and say, we're going to change that one to the new edition, or we're going to
Yeah.
edit it in some way. And I'm like, no,
Yeah.
I want to own the version of that the artist created that is out there. If the
Yeah.
artist then says, hey, I'm putting out a new version, great, I can choose to purchase that one. But I want to, and my son totally makes
Yeah.
like, it's so old school that you
Oh,
know
I
part
know.
of a collection that you want to own, dad.
Well,
That's
well, and it's funny because it's even like MP3s. You're like, I'm not even talking about the vinyl, man. I'm
right,
talking, like
right.
it can be. That's fine if you want to do the vinyl, but it's like even for me, when I was looking at new phones, like the big question is how much storage is in there, and they're like, why?
Exactly.
And I'm like, no, I want to load my whole music collection, and
Yes.
they're like,
Yes.
you can stream. I'm like, yeah, but what if we're driving through the mountains and your song stops? I'm like, it doesn't. It's not when you own it.
Yep. Well, and if I don't pay for Spotify and I say I want to go hear this song by Scott Boss, it says,
Yeah.
okay, here's a song that's like the one from Scott
Yeah.
Boss. And I'm like, you're driving
No.
me crazy. I want to own it so that I can go and go, I want that.
Yeah.
So that
Totally with you there.
freak thing of mine. But yeah, I want to own my music.
I'm
And so
with
good to
you.
know. Bandcamp is the way to go. I've got musician friends where they'll actually post the MP3s to their websites and say, if you'd like to pay me $1, whatever, and
Yeah.
that's more direct, better for them that I pay them $1 than that I stream it 2 times and they get 2 cents.
Yeah, not even. Yeah.
Um, so we should cut to our ad break, and luckily I've got Doug, the producer, here, and he'll fire that up and get that going. So, Doug, let's run that ad break, and then when we come back, we will continue with our interview. So, thank you very much, Doug. This week's show is brought to you by Sweat Stain Armpit Spray. For those that don't want to sweat but want to look like they did. Comes in 3 great scents: musk, old guy in a grocery store, and I just ate a ton of garlic and it's coming out of my pores. From the creator of pre-ripped jeans comes Sweat Stain. Why use the time and energy to create your own pit stains when you can use Sweat Stain? Available at any Kmarts that are still open, and on Wish. Oh, Doug wants me to remember to mention we have live shows coming up. So come participate in live recordings of Writers Not Writing at the Portland Fan Expo, which is February 17th to 19th. And we will also be at Norwescon in Seattle, April 6th to 9th. There are links to the tickets in the show notes. Make sure those are in there. Thank you. And the guests are TBA. We'd love to have you in the live audience. Bring some fun questions to ask our panels of procrastinating authors. See you in Portland or Seattle. Welcome back, everybody. So when you've been daydreaming lately, daydreaming is part of the process and also not part of the process. I think it's really important to have that time to think that is not, our hands on the keyboard. But at the same time, it can be a kind of procrastination. So what have you been dreaming about?
Man, all kinds of things. That's definitely where stories begin, as the daydream, and you start putting the pieces into place, and then you have to determine I don't know if you know the comedian Mitch Hedberg, but he always would say, I when I wake up in the middle of the night, and a lot of us do, you'll wake up and be like, oh, this idea and whatever. And I start dreaming it, and then I hashed it out as I'm laying here. And he's like, I have to determine, the notepad's across the room. I have to determine if that joke is good enough to get up for and write down. And I totally murdered the way he tells it. The joke's actually funny when he tells it, but you get the idea
Oh yeah, but
that
I've
I
been
have the
there.
same
Do I
thing.
reach over for my phone and write myself and
Yes.
run the
Because
risk
for
that
me,
the
it's,
light
yeah.
will wake up my partner?
Exactly. That's my problem is I've done that where I like hang over the side of the bed like that and you're just like lowest light setting and you're like and then you type and it's like doop, 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 and you're like stop
Yep,
it.
yep.
But you can't voice it because that'd be even worse. Why are you talking in the middle of the night? And why are you saying those horrible things? No, it's a story idea, I
Yeah,
swear.
yes.
Uh
This
the
is a
government
nightmare
would
that
be
I'm
after
recounting,
me.
but not to you. Don't worry, it's going into my phone.
Yeah, the government would be after me by now. They probably already are with all
Oh
the
yeah.
research you do for stories where you're like, all right, let's see how to break into a nuclear facility. And you're like, oh, yeah. I
Right.
swear it was for a book that's just not released,
Yes.
officer.
Which kind of poison should my character use?
Exactly,
Yeah.
because you're looking up all those kind of things and whatever. But yeah, so that's some of the daydreaming. One that I've thought about recently, like we all think about this, our mega millions. I don't know if it's just here or however big it is, like almost 2 billion at this point. and we got a friend a ticket for her birthday, and she lost. Sorry, otherwise I wouldn't even be doing this podcast. No,
Yes.
I'm kidding. Uh, but the joke was, like she's like, well, how much do you want if we win? And I'm like, if you win 2 billion, I
Yeah.
mean, whatever you want to give, because it'll be a drop in the bucket for you, but yeah,
Right.
everything will be covered for me. But so I started thinking about, like you think about when billionaires reach that status, and we always think, and that's the first thing you do when you think about winning is you go, okay, I would buy this, I'd buy that, I'd
Mhm.
make sure these friends didn't have any debt anymore, or however you would do it. I don't know, maybe you don't have friends like that and you're like, they
Oh
can
no,
struggle
totally
but
do.
come to
Absolutely.
my big parties. uh but like I've thought about all that. You'd be set up for life, you'd put money in so your kids would be fine forever, you do all that, and then in the end though, you might, okay, I would give to this charity. If I didn't have to work, I would work at the dog shelter. And if I didn't have this, I would do that. And I'd give money to this. And Damar Hamlin's charity would have $1 million in it or whatever. But then you look at billionaires and it's like, it just
Well,
feels like it's all for show. And they're just like, and I've been in like corporate meetings occasionally in past jobs where they'll be sitting there and you can just hear them being like, well, we really need two people up front. Not one person could do it by themselves. And then we could save this much on the budget. And you're just like, excuse me, that one person is going to burn out and then they're going to quit and I will just replace them. And it's just like, but you want good workers, don't you? Shouldn't you support the good, and you realize like being a billionaire, the way some people get there is all finding ways to cut the costs. And like if you look up or read stories about like Amazon warehouses and places like that are just
yeah,
awful, which they told in that book Nomadland, if you've heard of it or seen.
might
There's
have
a
not.
show
I'll
too,
check that
but
one out.
yeah, but they talk about that, but it always makes you think, like, well, God, I wouldn't do that. I wouldn't be Bezos going to space and whatever. I would be supporting all these people and doing all these charities and whatever. And then had the experience of having a job where they pay you for your travel and they set you up and make sure you're in a decent hotel and all that stuff. And so I started doing that enough, and my standards raised a little bit.
Yep.
And from Mr. Stay in the Scottish Inn on the side of the road of wherever
Yes.
in Indiana on the way to where you're going for the cheapest amount that just says color TV and that's their only feature. And you're like, yeah, is it cheap?
Yeah.
And then all of a sudden I'm staying in, Hilton's or whatever, which are just, just even the basic ones.
Yep.
You're just like, man, this is such a step up. And it's like breakfast and this and whatever you need. And you're like, okay. And so then I took my family on a trip, I accumulated points. And so I took them on a trip, or I took my wife and I, and like we took a night somewhere in Gatlinburg, Tennessee. And
Oh
we're
yeah.
like, cool, we're going to stay in this nice Hilton there and whatever. And so we get in, and immediately I'm like, well, they didn't do this, and the bathroom is a little, not in the greatest shape here. And there's, oh, look at over here on
Yep.
the curtains. But I start picking it apart, and she's like, well, good God, aren't we, already up on our high horse there,
Right.
Mr. Traveler? And then you jump like the far step from there, and you're a billionaire going, yeah, but do we really need two people up front? I don't think we do. I think we could get away with not paying them, and you're like, oh God, look how quickly it would be to get there just from a few experiences in a hotel, thinking just like, well, I mean, they could have cleaned that a little better, or they could have done this
Right.
better, or the breakfast was so. And you're like, man, it wouldn't take long. Give me
Well,
$1 billion at 18, and I would be an absolute jerk at this point of life, I think. And
well, but I don't know. I mean, I don't know if you would. I think what you're illustrating is we live in different like realities from
yeah,
billionaires. Like the leap is so huge. When you were describing the things you would do with the money, I was sitting there kind of doing the math in my head, and I'm going, okay, if I paid off all of the student debt of everyone in my family, if I paid off all their mortgages, if I was able to help give $1 million to this charity, whatever, and then you do the math and you go, that would be less than 1% of what you just
yeah,
like that.
yeah,
The amount is so immense that you and I, because of our standard of living, we can't even comprehend that. And so I
no,
read about these. I took my family out to New York for the New Year's to see the ball drop and the whole thing. It was a
nice,
lot of fun. This is the kind of thing I would not have been able to afford when I was younger, saved up for a long time. We're doing this thing, we're staying, same thing, cheapest hotels we can stay in, that kind of thing. And then we're driving along and Ubering it to get into the city, and there are these towers that they've built. And one of the ones, I was talking to the Uber driver and he was telling me they've got one where the building sways so much that the people who spent many millions of dollars to buy
yeah.
these condos don't live there. they've chosen to have it for status. And then they're like, it makes me sick. I'm going to live on my yacht, but I own one of those places that cost
Just
$3
to say I
million
do. Yeah.
just to say I do. It's a largely empty building at the top in terms of actual residents. And that is a different reality than you and I could possibly imagine. Oh yeah, I'm gonna have this house. And I feel like if people like you or I suddenly had, $2 billion, we would say, but I remember not having that. I'm not going to spend $2 billion on a place I won't live. I hope I would say I'm not going to
Yeah.
spend, millions of dollars on a place I refuse to live because it makes everyone seasick every day. I'd rather live
Yeah.
on my super yacht, which doesn't make people seasick because it's so big it doesn't move. Like,
Right. Yeah.
it's so wild. They live in a different world than we do.
Well, and I heard a billionaire on some documentary once, and they were talking kind of about the economy and issues with that. And he was going, "Listen, I sleep on one pillow, just so you know." He's like, "Me having, 20 billion doesn't do anything for the economy because I only can drive so many
Yep.
cars and wear so many pairs of pants. But if I actually put that back into my workers, then they're going to have more money
Yep.
to buy a good car, a new car, a new mattress, or a new pillow, or an extra pillow, or all these things that are supposedly good for the economy. But it's like when one person has it all, they can only use so much. Even if they buy a pointless condo and a swaying tower, that's still only one pointless condo and a swaying tower, and it's not doing anything because they don't live in the neighborhood, so they're not going down to the stores or anything. So you're just like, that's part of the point of all that. But it's
Well,
what
and then, I'm going to betray my socialism here, but like I, it was not a radical left winger, President Eisenhower, who had the tax rate at what 90%, for people who are at the very top. Like there is
right.
because I think at that point when people have that amount of money, they are playing a very different status game. For them, it's not about how am I going to use the $200,000 I made this hour? Like they don't care about
Yeah.
that $200,000. At that point, it's do I have $1 more than Bezos? Do I have
Yeah.
$1 more? And so they could pay taxes on everything over a billion at 99%, and they would still do all the same things that they do because they want to have the
Yeah.
$1 more. And the $1 billion is enough. Like that is plenty.
Yeah.
Nobody needs more than $1 billion ever. And then you're right. All that money is now productive. We would have socialized healthcare. We would have,
Right.
but it's not those folks who are the most opposed to that idea. It's folks like us who are saying, but someday I want to have the chance to have
Yeah.
$2 billion,
Yeah.
and fighting
Yeah. I want to
against it.
get
I'm
past
like,
that cap,
yeah, and I'm
which
like,
is,
no, just essentially cap it. $1 billion, and then the tax rate after that is 99%. And
yeah.
I think it
It's
would work just fine.
Well, it's funny because that is literally in my list of story ideas that I keep a spreadsheet of, was like wealth cap. And I know that's not a new idea, obviously, but like it was like wealth cap, and then this will happen, and it's kind of like evening the playing field, and everybody has $1 million, and then what happens from there? And let's write a story, and it just stalls out every time I think about it because every time I'm like, well, obviously the story would turn into somebody figured out how to get more than that, and
Yeah.
then all of a sudden had unlimited wealth and nobody else knew how, or and I'm like, somebody would abuse it, and that would be the story, and then we'd just be right back to America. Dang it, I don't want to write that story.
Yeah, yeah.
Never
But
mind.
I think there is a story there. It would be interesting to do. Who would be the people most opposed? And to have, billionaires going, this isn't really a hill to die on for me. Like I'm fine with it. Fine, wealth cap, whatever. As long as I can still have more than Bezos over there by $1, I win. And then
Yeah.
the interesting juxtaposition of, middle class, upper middle class strivers saying, but I work really hard. I
Yeah.
never want you to put that cap into place, not
Yeah.
realizing you could work your entire life as a brain surgeon, a
Right, and
well-paid
never get to
professional.
the
You're never going to have $1 billion. That's an amount of money that we can't even fathom. So
no.
yeah, so I would love a wealth cap. I think it's a great idea. Not a wealth cap. They can still get richer, just
Yeah.
tiny
It's just
increments of
they're
richer.
not keeping much of it. Well, and
Yeah,
that would be good because then they could get richer, and then it would all go back into our, like you said,
yeah.
socialized healthcare and
Go
all
ahead,
that, which would
try
be
and make
awesome.
$3 billion so that you make really after taxes
Yeah.
$1 billion and $3, and the other guy next
Yeah.
door only makes 1 billion and 1, and you are the
Yeah.
big winner that year. But we all are the big winner that year. Yeah,
For it.
but nobody's asking me.
No, no, they haven't asked me either. It's
Yeah.
weird.
So, what about what's going on in terms of your writing life outside of the writing itself? Not, next project down the road, that kind of stuff, but like how can folks support you now?
Yeah, so I have my three novels that you talked about at the beginning that just finished. So that's pretty much it for the series. It's one of those where it's like, yes, you could write another book in that world, but the three tie it up in a nice way. So it's definitely done. So if you're the person that likes to wait until you can hear what's going to happen, you can get all three books, and they're all out there on Amazon and all over the place online, and you can get a paperback. And I did an audiobook for the first book, also trying to get you hooked for the people, because I had friends being like, well, I don't really read, but I
Yeah.
listen to audiobooks. And I was like, well, I'll do the first one, but I don't know about you, but doing audiobooks is not exactly fun, especially
It's a
when you're
lot of work.
the producer and the editor and all of it. And so I did it, and we'll talk to the publisher, and they're like, yeah, I mean, that's a great idea if you can do it, because it's expensive to
Yeah.
pay somebody to do it. So if you can do all of that for free, we'll pay you like, most of the royalties. And I'm like, cool. So we did that. We worked that deal out, but then I was like, I'm not doing the second book. It was tough. So I'm like, the first one's on Audible, which is Interstellar Islands. And then since then, yeah, what I realized, and anybody who's ever tried to publish something realizes it takes a long time. And it's like a year, and then it's this, and then you need that, and then you need the artwork, and then you need the final edit, and then you send it back, and then they send it back, and then no, this doesn't fit in the line, so let's try this. And so I was like, man, between that, I hate being like, oh, my third book's out, see you in a year or two, so I
Right.
started that podcast with my stories in between, because I have a bunch of shorter stories or novellas or novels that and like I said, I wrote 5 novels during the pandemic. So I have ones before that I was like, these are still good, but they're not my best. And I'm like, well, I could read them on a podcast, because then it would
Yep.
be fun. You'd get a weekly, couple chapters or whatever. So right now I started doing short stories, so there'd be like a week or two, and you'd hear the whole thing. And then I started a novel to begin the year called Lila, which is a story. I used to work in this hospital, and they had the old, like, they moved the hospital down the road and kept the old one from like the 70s, and that was our billing office. And it was just every haunted house story you can
Yeah.
imagine, people recording in every stairwell to be like, did you hear this? Listen, you can hear a British lady, and there's nobody British that works here, and all those stories. And I loved, all that. And so I'm taking it all in, and like, man, there's an absolute novel here. And so one of the jobs I had was working, clearing like system errors. And so you would get this error, and it'd say blah blah blah, and the system is wrong, and you'd pull it up, you'd see the patient name, and you'd try to correct it. So that was the spark for that story, which was, this guy sees this patient name, a really specific name. Her name is Lila Zwerzinski. So it's a very specific, weird last name, and it pops up, and he's like, man, that's weird. Lila and I have hung out. We went out on a few dates. It was going pretty well, except for 3 weeks ago, she died. And why is her name on this ER board? Why is she over there? So he spends the beginning of the book like trying to catch her back alive in one of these rooms, and ends up, the rest of the story,
Discovering the yeah.
trying to communicate and figure out why he's seeing her name pop up after she's died. And so it was a kind of fun idea, but then also from a very understanding perspective of working there and having all the inside stories of stuff. It's totally fiction, but it was fun to like,
Yeah.
oh, and then that hallway is really creepy, and so I was easily able to use that. I'm not a real gory horror writer. I'm much more on the like, kind of mess with your mind a little bit and make you kind of wonder and whatever. I'm not a super pop scare person. If I ever did
Yeah.
it as a movie, I'm not a super fan of pop scares. I'm like, tell me something that makes me just dread,
Yeah.
like, tell me something that makes me go, oh man. And if that's true, that means this and that, like, that's what I like. So that's what I try to write. And on the horror side, now my other series that I talked about is sci-fi. And on that end of the world, it's not hard sci-fi. I'm much more, I think you could call it soft sci-fi. I think that's a thing, but it's really, I always pitch it as like, I write sci-fi for people that like the characters and relationships more than they like lasers and aliens. I'm like, I want you to care about the character, which was something I always learned, like reading Stephen King, because he
Yeah.
was a absolute do not read this guy, he's disgusting, and blah, blah, blah. That's all I ever heard growing up. And so when I finally read him, I was like, wait a
No,
minute, this guy's actually a
he's
really
a
good
really good
writer.
storyteller.
He's
Yeah,
a
he
really good
really is.
storyteller.
Yep.
He makes characters that you care about which therefore then you worry about the clown getting them or the whatever getting them in every story. And I'm like, man, you could take that out and it could just be the IRS coming for them and I would still care, which is
Yep.
really weird. But the way he writes, and I was like, so you can translate that into any kind of writing and just be like, look, whatever your idea is, cool. Make me care about the characters, and I will now care about what happens to them, no matter what the scenario is, to to a point, you know. And
Yep.
so that's always
I
been
am
something I've
in the
strived
same boat.
for.
My sci-fi is soft sci-fi, and I don't like the term soft sci-fi without a lot of preamble. Like I want to explain it to
Yes,
people because
it sounds like weak,
right.
like I'm just making it all up on the spot. I don't really understand anything in science. And you're like, no, that's not what I mean.
Yeah, well, and for folks out there who don't know those terms, I teach a sci-fi lit class, and the distinction is not the sci-fi isn't, I mean, what's hard or soft. That's the problem with the term. It's the hard sciences versus the soft sciences. So soft sci-fi is soft science fiction, and so it's sociology, politics. It's the stuff that is more character focused because it's about how do these people interact, and then hard science fiction is the mathematics, the physics, the maybe the chemistry. You don't get quite as much of that in some. So it's how does this spaceship work rather than how do the people on this spaceship interact with one another. That's the distinction
Mm-hmm.
between hard science fiction and soft science fiction. But we keep the hard and then we can't say sci-fi, and people don't understand. They're like, oh, you wrote weak sci-fi? No, that's not what it means at all. It's people
I,
focused.
yeah, and I think one of the best compliments I got was from multiple people now because you get friends to like read your series because they're like, well, I'll give it a shot because you're my friend kind of thing. And they're like, and the compliment I always get is like, I'm not a sci-fi fan, but I really enjoyed this. And I'm like, cool. So if there's some hard sci-fi fans out there, give it a try and you can tell me that you hate it or maybe you'll still like it. But I know that it generally lends more to people that just like fiction in general. And they're like, cool, throw it in that scenario because I just like cool settings, which was where the first book came from, Interstellar Islands. There's a song by this band Azusa that I was listening to, and it's called Interstellar Islands. And the lyrics don't go anywhere near what my book is about, but just the term. And I
It's
was
just a
like,
seed. It was
that's
enough.
a cool, yeah, that's a cool term. And I'm like, what does that make me think of? And it made me think of like, what if we like in a lot of sci-fi they um uh God, what's the term when you populate a
Oh yeah,
unpopulatable planet?
like space colonialism, like
Yeah,
colonizing
space,
different worlds.
colonize and God, there's another word for it where you can make it livable. You make the air
Oh,
breathable and all
terraforming.
that.
Yeah, terraforming.
Terraforming. Thank you. I was like, I should know this, even as a soft sci-fi guy. Uh, but they so I thought about that and I was always like they always do that and it's like we terraformed Mars, we terraformed Jupiter, all these things that you're like that's not, no, that would be
Yeah.
impossible. And I know it would still be impossible, but the point being, what if we terraformed the asteroid belt? You start with a
Mhm.
small one that's like the size of a parking lot, and can you get something atmosphere wise, breathable air that can continue? And so that was my thought of like, what if you went to the asteroid belt? And I know in real life it's spread out a lot, so you don't just see a bunch of asteroids next to each other. But if they pulled them closer with
Sure.
technology, and you had a bubble over here, and this was your island for this, and this is your forest island, and this is where people live, and then this is where you have this processing plant, and you kind of all work together to have all these little interstellar islands. And that was immediately the thought I had, and I was like, how would be a cool book to write.
Yeah.
And so that's where the story came from. And then it just kind of kept going into three other books, which I didn't, or three total books that I wasn't planning on. But once it started going, it was like, oh, that would be so cool if they lived out there. But it would be like a utopia. But as we know, no
Yep.
utopias ever work out perfectly. So, we had to go from
Well, and
there.
then
But
the characters take on a life of their own. How do they, now the reader's going, and I want to learn about what happens with this person who's living on this island, and the
and that
story takes off.
Yeah, and that was the big thing with that one that I was like, well, nobody's going to want to read about people that just live in this utopia. You've got to take the person from outside the utopia that's introduced so they can be the reader in a sense and be like, wait, you do what here? Wait, you get your food, and one of the things in this book is they get their food through nutrition. They use hagfish DNA. This is all stuff we came up with, but hagfish are a species that absorbs all their nutrients through their skin. And so I made that a big part of it. That's how they get their nutrients is they take these baths and they put nutrients in the bath and they absorb it after being injected with this hagfish. And it's all, that's the sci-fi-ish part if you want to get there. And so the point was, you go from being a human on Earth that's now out there going, I'm used to eating my food, and it's like, no, no, you're gonna take a bath and you're gonna feel good, and it's like, what?
One
And
of
then
the
of course they're like, well, how do you poop, or like what, like all the
yeah,
questions that come up, but it was nice to have a person, an outsider, be able to ask that question as
yeah.
your main character, so people could, figure out how would that work, and so
Well, and it makes
a lot of
me
fun.
think that really what you wrote is, I mean, it's a sci-fi series, but I bet fantasy fans would love it too, because the way fantasy often works is this is I want to explore this world. It's really
Hmm.
setting based. And then Portal Fantasy is, and I want somebody from our world to be able to
Yeah,
transport and go into that for the sake of the reader. It
exactly.
makes it easier. And then once we're into that world, I want to see how the world kind of evolves and how the characters interact, moving forward. And the setting becomes less important 3 books in. Now it's about these
Yeah.
people and how they're interacting, but you've already tapped into that love of this new place. So I'll bet fantasy fans would like it. I bet you'd also find that hard sci-fi fans, almost all hard sci-fi fans, are also soft sci-fi fans. Like, it's
Yeah.
very few who are like, I just want to know how the spaceship works. Like,
Right.
your
Well, and
Trekkies
there's
like love the characters too.
yeah, well, and there's some of that where there's like um some of the the technology and the stuff that I researched. I don't think I went as deep in this one, but on later things that I wrote, I have a couple friends that are like into rocket science and physicists and stuff, and that not into it, but like got degrees and things,
Yeah,
and so every time I come up with an idea, I'm like, okay, so let's say on a nuclear fission, how this would work if I did this, and they're like, well, okay, you wouldn't want to call it that, but you'd call it this, and this is
yeah,
what would make it glow and whatever, and you're just like, cool, all right, I'm gonna go with that, but
yeah.
then I'll run it by them and be like, here's how I wrote it, and then they'll approve it for me. And it's great to have friends like that because it's just not something I was ever great. I'm the storyteller, but you got to tell me, how to make it work. And I just think from my side of it, like you said, with the Portal fantasy and all that, like for me, it's always been about like again with Stephen King, his was always about like this awful scenario, be it a monster, be it a whatever, and that's what the story is about. But really, it's about all these characters that we care about, all their
Yeah.
backstory. And so that was my thing, is kind of settings, and not every book is completely focused on that, but a lot of them are. And it's just like I find the setting and go, God, that'd be really cool if we had a city out in the middle of the ocean and it was its own kind of colony that lived out there because the water levels rose on Earth. But then what would happen with the people out there? And so that was one of the ones I wrote during the pandemic, of just like, okay, but let's imagine what would happen there and what would go right and what would go wrong. But mainly it's that we care about all the people out there. So it doesn't matter that it's a city there. It could be somewhere in New Jersey, or it could be out in the middle of the ocean.
Right.
But either way, we care about these people. And it's what it all comes back to in the end.
So would you say your prospective reader who's going, oh, this sounds really cool, would they be better off to listen to your podcast first? Any pieces that relate to the trilogy, or start with the trilogy, then go to the podcast?
Yeah, I would start with the trilogy. So I wrote the first book, and it came out in 2020. The second book came out in 2021, and I started the podcast in 2022. And one of the first episodes I did is a recap of book one and two. So especially for the people that read it a year ago and are going, I want that third book, but I don't remember what happens, or I don't have time to read, or whatever, and I'm just like, hey, I got you. Come here, I'll give you a recap of the first two books. So don't listen to that one. You can listen to any other one, but don't listen
Okay,
to that one if you haven't read them, because it's going to spoil everything for you.
good to know.
So
Good to know,
so
because
yeah,
I am
definitely
excited about it.
read the first two, or listen to the Audible audiobook of the first one and then read the second one, and it's on all the ebook or paperback formats you can want, so you can get it either way.
Good, because I pretend that I'm saying readers in general, but really I'm saying me. Like, I want to
Okay.
read these
Yeah.
books. So
Yeah,
that's
well, don't spoil it, but if you want to listen to the podcast, I'm on part two of Lila right now, or there's the other ones, the other short stories. There's some are humorous, some are horror, I did an October horror month on the podcast, so that's all just new stuff that you can hear and whatever. So
Well, I'm going to start with
yeah.
the trilogy because that sounds right up my alley. Like, I
Oh,
like that
cool.
kind
Yeah.
of the world focused and people focused, this kind of space. How would this work in this particular setting?
Yeah,
That
yeah.
sounds really good.
Cool.
Um, so the next thing we do is we have a weekly poll every week that we put out there for our listeners, for our viewers. And last week's our guest Maren Anderson writes retellings of Shakespearean plays for kids for a local children's theater. And so she asked if she should adapt Comedy of Errors or Macbeth. And when the poll first went up, it was like all Macbeth. And I thought, oh, this is my fault. I've totally biased it because I talked on the show about how I thought
Yeah.
it would be hilarious to see a bunch of, 8-year-olds going, I was from my mother's womb untimely raped, you know, but, uh, but it,
Yeah.
but it ended up being 50-50. So that's not at all helpful to Marin. So I apologize,
No.
Marin. The fans are split on whether you should do Comedy of Errors or Macbeth next, but that was our poll for this last week. So what should our poll be for this next week?
All right. So mine, this has come up lately, talking about redesigning the bathrooms at home when we, maybe after tax return season and all that. And one of the things you think about, especially during the pandemic, was toilet paper, right?
Yep.
So I thought about, what about a bidet? And it's becoming more popular to attach a bidet to your toilet. And it's simple. It's not like,
Yeah.
in movies and stuff growing up, it was always like a separate one and only in the fanciest hotel. Now it's like, no, anybody and their brother can order one off of Amazon and hook it up to their toilet. And especially with kids, they waste a ton of toilet paper. And being an adult, it's like, well, that would be nice. So the question, you get four answers here. So you pay attention. Um, so how do you feel about bidets is really the question. So answer number one would be I love blasting my butt clean with water because some people already have them and they're like, dude, I'll never go back.
Yep. They swear by
That's okay. I hear that a lot. So then number two is I might try it in the right situation, which is me. Like I said, redoing the bathrooms, probably going to try it. Number three is never. TP for life. You like toilet paper, you like whatever, or you just don't want to change your ways, whatever it is. And number four is when in Japan. And I know that doesn't sound like an answer, but if you've ever been there, I've not, but I have friends that have been there. They all use them and they have all kinds of settings on them
it.
to the point that you have to figure out how to program them before you dare to use it from whatever.
Well, number four is my bidet experience. But not in Japan. I've never been to Japan yet, but in Europe,
Yeah, in Europe.
absolutely. And I was like, I guess I'm here. I might as well see what's up
When
with
in
this.
Europe.
In Egypt, that was the way to, you'd have toilet paper after you use the bidet, just a tiny bit, just to dry.
Yeah, yeah. Just
But
to dry off.
yeah, you don't need the toilet paper for the cleaning. That's done. And so yes, that's yeah, I would certainly be a number four. Oh, see, I'm doing it again. I'm betraying what my choice would be. So that will be up
Don't
on
sway the
Twitter and
audience. Yeah.
Facebook, and folks can weigh in on that this week, and then we'll come back to it next week and see how many people want their butts blasted, which sounds like a very different show. But
YouTube is going to block us now. Good
yeah,
job.
right. Yeah, it's not going to be like, yeah, we'll get some kind of content warning for the butt blasting.
Yeah.
Uh, so what about contacts? Where can folks find your stuff?
So yeah, so that's all over. So depending if you like music and things too, my website is kind of a hub. So it's scottboss.weebly.com. I think we're going to put the links in the show
Yep,
notes,
it'll be
right?
in the
So you
show
won't have
notes
to
for
write,
sure.
you don't have to write that down. I have on Facebook, it's Scott Boss Author. At Twitter, it's at Scott F Boss, Scott F Boss. And then if you follow my podcast, it's called Story Time with Scott Boss. So the easiest way, just pick, if you use Apple or Spotify, or if you use Stitcher or Google. I put them on there too. Most people don't listen to those apparently. from the stats I've gotten,
Yeah,
people mainly use Apple and sometimes use Spotify is what I've learned. But if you use those, look for Story Time with Scott Boss and save it, just make it, mark it so it tells you when I put up a new episode. I've done them kind of sporadically for the first few months, but this, like I said, I'm doing a novel right now, so it's every Thursday I'm releasing another part, and each of them are like 25 minutes or so. So it's like a chapter or two, or depending how long the chapters are. So it's just a good like weekly update. And so right
yeah,
now we're up to part two. And so if you're somebody that wants to binge a couple, you can do two in a row, or if you want to wait another week, there'll be three options. But it's going to go all the way through March with that, so you can kind of join in whenever you like and just listen. And on there, I always do an update of what I'm eating. I don't know why. I just started doing that and talking about what I'm randomly eating. So you'll hear random things I've either cooked or just snacks I found at the store, and I talk about those on the podcast. I ramble a little bit. Then we get to the story, and then sometimes I use all my own music in it as well. So I the intro music, the interludes and endings, and then occasionally, if the story's kind of short, I'll throw in a full song at the end just for a fun little like I really like this song of mine, and it's kind of chill and fits the moment, so I'm going to throw this on the end. So it's just a good mixed bag of all kinds of creations and things, and just a way to get other stuff out there. So my podcast is a thing that is more consistent. I do update the Facebook, but those are just
Yeah.
posts. So sometimes it's nice to have some actual content if you want it.
Yeah. Yeah. Oh, that's great. Okay. Well, thank you very much for being on. I want to thank some folks. Thanks to the artist Max Oakland, who reached out and provided one of his songs for our intro, I Prefer the Dusk. Let Max know you like it by following him on Twitter at Max Oakland. Thanks to Halizna CCO for their song Kids for the ad break. Thanks to Doug for putting that together. Thank you, Doug, always for all you do for this show. I cannot forget to mention that Writers Not Writing is a production of Not a Pipe Publishing. So please go to notapipepublishing.com and check out the amazing books written by writers who don't procrastinate too much. If you like the show, rate and review it. Please go check out Scott's books, rate and review those too. Hitting that 5th star and letting him know you like it will absolutely make his day. So it's a quick, easy thing to do after you have enjoyed Scott's work. And I talk way too much on the show, so I want to make sure you have the last word. What should our send-off be today?
All right. I think the message the world needs right now is to be a good human. Be kind to each other, regardless of your race, your religion, your gender, sexuality, or your taste in books, because reading is important, even if you're reading something that I would never read and would throw it out if it was in my house. It's still better to read. So, regardless.
If I take my time